stand as we recite our four-way test of the things we think, say, or do. First, is it the truth? Second, is it fair to all concerned? Third, will it build goodwill and friendships? Fourth, will it be beneficial to all concerned? I'd like to welcome Rotarian Melissa Strickerts to lead us in the invocation.
Please join me in a manner to what you are accustomed. In light of the situation today and the release of the hostages in Israel, I found a message of prayer. Infinite Spirit, bring peace and goodwill to all peoples. Direct the pathway of every nation into unity, happiness, and prosperity. Remove the thought of fear and greed from the mind of man. Let every thought of hate be turned to love, every thought of fear be turned to faith, every thought of doubt be turned to certainty, every thought of war be turned to peace.
All right, go ahead and have a seat. Thank you and welcome. We're going to flick through a few things here quick so we can get to our program. And James has a microphone, and if you brought a guest today, I'd like you to raise your hand, please. And there's one right there. Rich has a guest to your right. And you stand with your guest, and please introduce them.
Thank you, fellow Rotarians. It's my pleasure to introduce Shane Linder with Geotech Engineering.
Tom Van Wy is my name. I'm delighted to introduce to all of you my beautiful wife, Kristen.
Chuck Hyatt, happy to introduce my wife, Janelle. She's my wife of 56 years, and this happens to be our 58th anniversary of our first date. So being a true romantic, I brought her to Rotary. And our son, Tim Hyatt, is here as well. He works for Life 96.5 Radio. He's married to Melissa, one of our panelists.
I'm married to one of our panelists today, by the way, Tim.
Hello, Rotarians. Today I have with me Julian Beaudoin, who is an entrepreneur, owner of The Hub. He and his wife also own Swamp Daddies, and he's a candidate for U.S. Senate.
Other guests? See no hands. I will introduce my guests. Let's see, Ellen, if you'd stand. Alan Keysbo is a retired pastor from The Point Is to Serve. He spent 25 years in youth ministry, which he said in dog years is like 150 years at First Baptist. So I'd like to welcome Alan Keysbo. And a roaming Rotarian today, Dr. Michael Card from USD, served in political science there. He advised me on some of the things we're going to talk about today. So thank you and welcome, Dr. Card. And my newest friend, Zach, as a guest. Zach and I met when he's with Leadership South Dakota right now, works for Sanford, I think, and currently running for, what, City Council? I can't remember. It is City Council. Zach, close enough? All right, please welcome Zach. And welcome Rotarian Sarah Marr from Rotary South.
Let me go log into YouTube.
All right, I think that's it for guests. Junior Rotarians this year, or this month, forgive me, Delaney Dowman from Lincoln. I saw Delaney. Could you stand? Let us know where you're at. There she is. And it's Downham, right? Downham. All right. And let's see, how about Ellie Maddox from Sioux Falls Christian. Ellie here. There she is. And Sky Kane from Jefferson. I don't think Sky was able to join us today. Originally, he was supposed to speak, so we'll probably hear from him next week. So thanks for all of our junior Rotarians who are joining us today. Here's a reminder that a week from tomorrow, in honor of Polio Day, we are having a walk. Actually, Rotary South is hosting a walk at Lake Ole in Harrisburg. So you're welcome to attend that. It's a very short walk around the lake, and then you end up walking down to Fresh Horses and celebrate your achievement. But they're raising money That's the way that Rotary South raises money for the polio fund. So thanks for the invitation, and hopefully you can join us next Tuesday at 5:30. This last weekend, Barry Sackett and I went down to the trail retreat, and you'd be surprised at how many 30-year-olds generally know who this is, but who are we? Skipper and Gilligan, right? Yes. Apparently there was in the new movie, I can't remember what it was. There's a character who looks like Gilligan, but I think there was over 4,000 people who went through the line on trail retreat. So they went along Rotary Way, along the playground by Jacobson Plaza, came down behind the canopy, and just, like I said, thousands and thousands of people. Some stood there in line for an hour and a half, 2 hours. So a great tradition and really great exposure to a new development behind the Steel District. So your chances next year. And by the way, the answer to the question of how many pounds of candy does it take to feed 3,000 kids, the answer is about 30 pounds. So we'll remember that for next year. Lastly, there is a sheet on your table, in addition to the sheet you probably saw about the walk, to volunteer for Feeding South Dakota. It's our first organized service opportunity as a club, and welcome you in the week of service that we're going to do out at Feeding South Dakota. Scan that QR code, sign up for one of the many slots available, and in a couple of weeks we'll hear more about the need of food and food scarcity in our city and in our state when we hear from some of the food organizations. So you can take care of that. All right, so we're going to get right into our program, and I want to invite past President Kurt Lautenbach up to just do a bit of an introduction on why this is an important topic for our club to visit about. And while he's doing that, I will invite our panelists to come on up, and we'll find a seat and we'll get started. So welcome, Kurt Lautenbach.
So Nicole, can you put that picture of the Gilligan and Skipper back up for a second? If you can't get to it that quickly, that's okay.
Give me 1 second, Kurt.
That's all right, don't worry about it. But how many of you were confused, couldn't tell the difference between this Gilligan and the real Gilligan? Nice job, Barry. Seriously, good afternoon, fellow Rotarians. As we approach the 250th anniversary of the United States, it's a fitting time to reflect on how we handle political tension and civil discourse. Political polarization has reached unprecedented levels, threatening the foundations of our democratic institution and the social cohesion that make America the great country that it is. Just yesterday, I heard the following quote from retired Supreme Court Justice Anthony Kennedy on an interview on CBS Sunday Morning. Who saw that? Anybody see that yesterday? Anybody remember his last words? His last words were, and I quote, "I'm concerned democracy presumes an open, rational, thoughtful, decent discussion where you respect the dignity of the person with whom you disagree. And if it doesn't have that, then democracy as we know it is in danger." I thought those are fitting words for the conference or the discussion we're going to have today. We are in challenging times as ideological differences dominate social media, but as Rotarians, we also see this as an opportunity. One of Rotary International's key areas of focus is peace building and conflict prevention, which is why we're having this conversation today. We're fortunate to have with us three insightful panelists: Melissa Hyatt from Mobile Leadership, Dr. David Wiltsey over here from the South Dakota State University Department of Political Science, and Dr. Joel Allen from Dakota Wesleyan University's McGovern Center. Together, they'll explore the history of conflict in the U.S., human response, and leadership in divisive times. Moderated by Eric S. Erickson, Club President, this program underscores Rotary's commitment to integrity, decency, and constructive dialogue. So let's approach today's discussion with open minds and a shared commitment to peace building, knowing that the conversations we have here will help to create a more peaceful and understanding community, both within and outside our city and state borders. Let's welcome our panel.
Thank you, Kurt. And There are so many different directions we could go with a conversation like this, but I believe that this will be the first of a series that our program committee will put together on this topic. It's really, as Tom Simmons said to me one day, it's a conversation about conversations, but it's hopefully a conversation that ends up in action. And we're not sitting around just talking about good ideas and doing nothing and saying just give peace a chance. This is a call to action to be leaders in our community about how we disagree with each other, how we seek to understand each other, and then what we do with that understanding from that point forward. Doesn't necessarily mean winning an argument. As my pastor has said to me, to our congregation a number of times, nobody ever became a Christian by losing an argument. And so the intention here today is not to bring up super divisive issues and debate them. We may do that in a future program. But today we're just going to talk about the current status of our democracy and what we as leaders in our community can do, even within our own families or at our workplace or in the community. So, thank you for understanding where we're going to try to go with this. So, what I want to do is kind of go through, where we are, where we've been maybe in the past, and where ultimately we could go. And Dr. Wiltsey, I wanted to start with you as we discuss the understanding the division that exists in our community and actually across our country today. You had mentioned something that I hadn't heard before called affective polarization. Could you describe what that means and why does that matter and how does it apply to what we feel today?
Yeah, thank you. Over the past 30 or 40 years, as we've really seen a separation between Democrats and Republicans, both at the elite level, meaning our politicians, and at the mass level, the nature of the division has really changed. Formerly, when politics was more materially based, where it's kind of a fight for different resources and appropriations and that sort of thing, our political divisions could be healed a lot more easily by different kinds of compromises, reconciliation processes, these standard things. But over the past 30 years or so, our divisions have become more rooted in our identities, and our politics and our political partisanship has become much more identity-based than it has over time. And one of the things that's come along with that is we're no longer seeing people as our adversaries in the political arena. We're beginning to see them as adversaries, as enemies. And with the underlying identity things, we're beginning to see them as kind of a cultural adversary. And that's what I mean by affective polarization, where it's not so much a division based on policy, but the sense of unity, the sense of belonging to a party is more defined by your relationship to your adversary than it is to your own co-partisans. And that comes hand in hand with a phenomenon we call negative partisanship, where we really define ourselves more by our adversaries than we do our co-partisans. And the affect that we have for our own party is far outweighed by the hatred we have for the other. And that's just particularly destructive when it comes to the informal organizations and things outside of Congress, civil organizations and the like, as we're trying to have conversations about any policy issue. That just muddies things up.
Yeah, thank you. I think Dr. Allen, you being with Dakota Wesleyan and the McGovern Center, but also leading conversations through Braver Angels, could you describe your work with Braver Angels and what kind of conversations are you willing to have with knowing what David just described, which is such a strong affect for your stance? Are we in a situation where we can't have civil discourse anymore, or debate? Or is it a debate, or is it just understanding?
Well, let me start just by describing what Braver Angels is. So Braver Angels is a national organization that works on helping people in our nation improve our public conversations so that we can have civil discourse over serious and contentious divides. And so it got started in the 2016 presidential race, where a group of friends realized that their friendship was being broken over the fact that half of them were supporting Hillary Clinton and the other half President Donald Trump. And so it turned out that a family marriage therapist at the University of Minnesota, Bill Doherty, was asked to come along and kind of prepare a way for them to have a conversation using the principles of marriage dynamics, especially couples that are in serious disarray in their marriage relationships, taking those principles and applying them to political discourse. And so he did that, and they started to meet and follow these guidelines that were actually guidelines taken from the world of marriage and family therapy. And they ended up developing a very close bond as friends, and they even took it on the road and did that. And there's a documentary you can watch about this. You just go to YouTube. So that's what Brave Angels is. They've got several ways of doing this. So they're red-blue conversations, which are really interesting. I've done several of them and just had a great time, where you literally divide people up, and you've got a lanyard, and it's either red or blue, and you just divide people up and then give them a series of questions, and I've had some great experiences that way. And then they also have debate. So since we're in a college context, we use a lot of the debating methods, but the word debate is just not exactly correct. It's really more a courageous conversation. So that's what we call them. And so we've done all kinds of topics. During the last election cycle, we did aspects that were going to be on, or initiating measures for constitutional amendments that were going to be on the ballot. So we did 3 debates. We did the food tax, which ended up being the most controversial. Rick Weidman argued that one out on the pro elimination of the food tax side. Then we did top 2 open primaries and had a great time with that one. And we did the abortion one. And and we had all kinds of people that were leading voices in that area. And Rick came out as the lonely, argued for the constitutional amendment for the viability of that. But in all of those topics, even the abortion one, we never had a breakdown of decorum. We got close, but never had a breakdown of decorum. And then we also did a lake debate, which was a debate about the dredging of our lake. Okay, but to get back to your question, we haven't had an experience yet, even though we've picked the hardest topics. We haven't had a single experience yet where decorum has been completely dissolved. The last debate we did was the hardest, and it was the prison in Mitchell issue. Now the prison issue is completely over, but at that time it was a live issue. We didn't know where that state prison was going. We had an electrical outlet, electrical storm right before it happened, and we had no heating and no cooling in the building, so the building was getting hot, and then the sound went out. So we were literally shouting at each other in a sauna, and even under those circumstances, with the incredible concern and anxiety that was being developed around that issue, people feeling like, my family's had this farm for umpteen million years, and now you're going to put a prison right next to it. We managed, and I think that we were better for it. So I don't know how well that answers the question. But
That's great. I think we'll come back to talking about Braver Angels again more. Melissa, in your many roles, which I'd love to have you tell us how you came up with, is it Levav? And also just your understanding of human emotions and what we attach our emotions to and how we respond when we're faced with someone who disagrees with us. Can you just describe how all of that plays into this political divide that we have?
So my business is called Levav, Leadership Consulting. Levav is Hebrew for heart, but it means more than the organ. It's your inner gut, it's your intuition, it's where your feelings reside. but it also means seat of courage. So through Lavav Leadership Consulting, what I do is I help facilitate courageous cultures by paying attention to the inner life of leaders. Another way I describe what I do is I help people get emotionally healthy. And so as we've been having this conversation, Dave, the identity politics is something that really stands out to me. And the irreducible need of every person is to feel loved and connected. It's an irreducible need. And in this time and age, we're all afraid of not being loved and not being connected. So identity politics becomes a really easy way to have counterfeit belonging. You know what to say to fit into a certain group. You know that you'll be welcomed there and accepted, whether you believe it or not. And so with the work that I do is trying to help people understand the difference between shame and guilt. So shame is, I am bad. Guilt is, I did something bad. And so in my work, what I constantly, just as my own person, I'm trying to connect my frustration with politics to specific behavior. I don't like it when people use fear to control a group of people. And that I don't like whether it's Democrat or Republican. So as soon as I can get away from labels and labeling people, and I can connect it to behavior, it helps me be less hypocritical.
It feels like, you got me talking in those terms, feels like, but empathy, it seems like is seen as weakness. And you talked about different kinds of empathy. Could you describe, I think there was cognitive empathy and affective empathy and some of those, there's this whole feeling of, if you're feeling what somebody else is feeling, then it's too much. But if you just completely disregard what they're feeling, then it's not enough.
Yeah, so I don't know the difference between cognitive and affective, what the two were that you talked about, but when I'm teaching empathy, so empathy is something that I teach, and there's 5 parts of empathy. It's perspective taking, which is believing what people tell you, staying out of judgment. I know I'm in judgment as soon as I start making up a story about why somebody did something or thinks something or does something. So I have to get curious. That's how I'm staying out of judgment, is if I get curious. The next one is recognizing emotion, and then checking in. So empathic failure happens when we don't check in. So I might think somebody's upset, so I treat them as if they're upset. It would be better for me to check in and say, are you upset? And then they can tell me yes or no. And then the last one is mindfulness. That's the last step of empathy. And I think what people get wrong with empathy is that they think there's no accountability. And there can be accountability with empathy. In fact, empathy without accountability might be counterfeit. But there's another component of empathy which is connected to self-compassion. And so if I'm judging others, if I'm judging myself for being late, I hate being late, I'm upset with myself and I'm judging myself. But somebody else comes in and they're 5 minutes late and I'm like, hey, no problem, it's fine. If I can't give myself self-compassion in those hardest moments, then my empathy is laced with judgment. It's really, I'm judging others. So I think there's this component with empathy that has to do with how we treat ourselves. And we have a hard time having grace for ourselves. And so we harshly criticize ourselves, which makes it really easy to harshly criticize others.
So Dr. Wiltsey, as we think about just everything can be a disagreement these days, and I mean honestly, as we come up to another session and here, just think about the way people disagree on things is different than it has been. Can you tell us from a historical perspective, have there been times like this before? Does it just seem like it's worse now than it has been, or have we gone through times like this before in our country?
Well, it has been worse. Obviously, we've had a civil war, but the context for that was very different. The lines of demarcation are very clear geographically, and that's not as much the case today. Even though there are, clearly red states, clearly blue states, these states still are fairly divided. So the terms of the disagreement today are a lot different than they have been in eras has gone by. And I am, rather concerned about the tone of politics as opposed to some of the other times outside of the years right up to the Civil War, in terms of just the intensity and the animosity that exists between the parties. We've gone through very competitive times before, but what really is different about the way politics is dividing itself now and it was 40, 50 years ago and beyond, is our parties have become very sordid on issue after issue after issue. Prior, when our party system was very decentralized, things were based more in the states, the parties at the national level were more mixed, even though locally they were pretty unified. So what that meant for national politics was you would not have the same coalition on any given bill in any given Congress. You didn't have people routinely voting with their party 95, 100% of the time like you do now. Your adversaries on one bill would have been an ally on another. And so you had to deal with people, and you had to treat people decently, because you didn't know if you were going to meet that person in the next round. Today, that's not the case. You look at the party line voting in Congress after politics has become nationalized, and issue after issue, vote after vote, we are dividing ourselves neatly down the center, case after case after case. And what that allows you to do is treat your adversary like an enemy. And it really allows you to dehumanize them in a lot of ways. And, quite frankly, our leadership in Congress at times has been accentuating that. I mean, back in the 90s, Newt Gingrich told all of his people to go home on the weekends so they wouldn't be talking to their Democratic counterparts. And God forbid, have your families actually meet and establish good relations between families. And that has changed the tone as well. So our institutions have reinforced this. Our culture is reinforcing this. This is a tricky situation to work our way out of.
You said that, talking about our society and the way of what we expect is normal within our society, or within the way that our country even remains united, is it all around the Constitution, or is there more than that? I mean, where do we get our social norms from?
Oh, it's far more than the Constitution. It's far more than our institutions. Any democracy is like this. Constitutions come and go. But what really holds democracies together are norms, are these unwritten rules, rules of decorum, things that you do, things that you don't do. I always give my students the example of what keeps me from going downtown Brookings and just yelling at people as they go by. Is there a law that prevents me from doing that? Are there rules that prevent me from doing that? No. It's just a sense that this is not what you do. And I don't want to be that guy who's known as the wacko downtown yelling at people. So these norms are really important for democracy, that we accept certain rules, we accept certain processes. It doesn't matter really how we elect these folks, it doesn't matter what our institutions look like, but when you lose these norms, when you lose these unwritten rules, your system begins to fray. And that's really the threat that we see today, is the norms, these unwritten rules, are just being broken left and right. And that has changed politics for the worse.
Joel, we've heard the word courage a couple of times from all of you.
Thank you.
These conversations that you have at Dakota Wesleyan through Braver Angels, you distinguish between, is it moral courage and moral certainty? Can you explain that and maybe how that causes more division?
One explanation, I teach world religions as well, and I often will use this story, especially when we're doing Judaism. There's a great story, I'll call him Rabbi Two Pockets. His name was probably Nazi or something like that, but we'll call him Rabbi Two Pockets, who would get up every day and he'd write down on 2 slips of paper. On one side, he'd write down, "This world was made for you alone." On the other side, he would write down, "You are nothing but dust and ashes." And he'd put that first sheet of paper in his left pocket, the right sheet of paper, the other sheet of paper in the other pocket. He realized he had to live his life between those two extremes. So life was all about figuring out how and when it's appropriate to think of as dust and ash, or the world for whom, the person for whom the whole world had been created. And I think a lot of leadership is much the same way today. It's a matter of learning when you have to just hold your own and say, this is the right way to go, and I'm absolutely certain, and we have to do it now. Or the time where it's appropriate to say, I believe this is the right way to go, and we need to sit down and talk to make sure we're all on the same page. And one I would say is a little bit more moral certainty, which is dangerous because we never have all the information. We're always making decisions based on less than perfect information. And on the other side, it's dangerous because moral courage. Never, in situations where you never make the decision that needs to be made. And so I think both of those are balancing truths that we have to hang on to in this day and age especially, because we're in the middle of these very, very difficult conversations. Sometimes it's best to just say, hey, I think I've been looking at this the wrong way. You might have something to teach me here. What is it? Or sometimes you just have to say, that is wrong. That is the wrong perspective, and there's no way I will ever learn from it. I will ever agree to that truth. And so just as a way of kind of dividing up the difference between moral courage and moral certainty. And they both have their strengths and weaknesses, and it's a better part of wisdom to figure out when, why, which one.
Well, let's say you're a leadership coach. So what role does leadership play in all of this when you're under pressure and to be, at times to be certain, but at times to have courage and to be vulnerable and you have to lead with confidence. Well, how does that all work with this?
Yeah, as you were talking about moral courage and moral certainty, I was thinking about when I'm doing leadership coaching, I want to be really clear about what the person's values are, and we connect that to behavior. So I know I'm operating in these values when I am open to hearing from others, when I speak up. And so I think there's some moral certainty that I have around, I will not believe a lie that things can't get better. I have moral certainty that there's a reason to hope. I have moral certainty about the value of each person and how people are treated, and that there should be freedom for people. So those things I think I have moral certainty about. But the moral courage is speaking up. Like, I ran for office in 2016, and Parker Palmer has been somebody that I've looked to for wisdom and guidance. And he had written an article called The 5 Habits Needed for Democracy. And there's this one part in it that said, what America needs now more than ever is for people to have the chutzpah to speak up and say what they think, and the humility to know that their view might be limited. And what I learned is that I couldn't even practice humility unless I had had the courage to speak up. If I hadn't had the courage to speak up and say, I disagree, or I think differently, or what about, then humility was false. If I stayed quiet, that was a false humility. And so I think that moral courage is people needing to have the courage to have the hard conversations, to ask more, to ask what would that look like. So yeah, that's what I would say.
Yeah. And Dr. Wiltz, yeah, so thinking about it from the politician's point of view, how does a political leader have moral courage to stand for something they believe in without being punished by their base or by their party or getting, kicked out of office?
Yeah, that's the big trick. because politicians are very cross-pressured on this, and they are highly incented nowadays to engage in some very destructive behavior. If you look, say, at Congress today, and you think about what's important in terms of getting elected, that's very different than what it was 40, 50 years ago. 40 or 50 years ago, we had this thing called incumbency advantage. And how did you get incumbency advantage? You did right by your district. And that allowed for people like Tom Daschle, Tim Johnson, any other number of Democrats to get elected in a place like South Dakota. They can't do that these days because our electorate is so partisan now that we have stopped evaluating these folks through that lens of constituent service and other tangible things, outcomes that we're getting from Congress. We're now judging them through the lens of partisanship. And you can really draw a nice, neat line on how people have evaluated folks like this and the prospects of people like Daschle and Johnson, Democrats who are getting elected in red states, and Republicans that were getting elected in Democratic states. That transformation took place at the same time. And nowadays, you are rewarded not for that kind of good institutional output, you're rewarded for throwing red meat at your base. And I'm not sure how to incent folks in office to behave otherwise. Because the first and foremost thing that they're thinking about is re-election. Even if they might not be certain that they want to run again, they want that option open. And they're not going to do anything that's going to harm that. And sometimes, making a good moral decision that runs up against their base, that can be pretty tricky. And if I could wave my magic wand, and I don't know if we're going to get into party stuff later, we can hold off, or we will? Okay, well, I'm going to wave my magic wand, and this is where I'm going to lose the audience. As a political scientist, one of the things that we've noticed about democracies is all of them have parties. And all of them have parties because they do very important things for democracy. And traditionally in our country and other democracies, it's been our political parties that have been very good at mediating conflict between individual politicians and other interests. And we have systematically weakened the parties in this country to a point where they have virtually no institutional sway over their members. And as we have weakened these important mediating institutions, it's no accident that our politics has become more and more bitter. And the animosity between the parties is off the charts. So this is where I would, if I could wave that magic wand and strengthen one institution, it would be the political party.
And would you say two parties, or do you think of the creation of a third? Or there is a third, I guess it depends.
Well, there it is, but the number of parties in a country is really determined by the electoral system, and unless you guys want to have a completely different electoral system, we're probably not going to have more than two viable parties. But we did pretty well with two main parties, and several little ones kind of challenging here and there, and some of them becoming a dominant party later on. I don't care. Well, I do, but that's beside the point. For democracy to function well, we just need to have these things strengthened a bit.
Melissa, I saw you making a note there. Did you have a thought on that, or did you front?
I think when I ran for office, I remember somebody saying, I don't trust politics, but I trust you. And I was like, yeah, till you don't. And so when I'm working with people, again, I'm connecting to behavior, so I want to see the behavior that you trust. And so when I think about the political leaders that I trust, or even people in general that I trust people who change their mind. I trust people who will do a hard thing, even if it doesn't benefit them. I trust people who speak up and say what they think. So I'm trying to figure out, as we go forward, again, it's one of those moral certainties. I think we can trust people, and I think we can build trust as a group. I don't trust people who dehumanize others. I don't trust people who manipulate and lie. You know, so I think we can do better as a people and just understanding what do we trust, and then we look for that in our leaders. What do we don't trust? And we look for that, but right now trust is based on ideology.
Thank you. Joel, back to Braver Angels, and you know, what I am hopeful for is that our national politics doesn't influence how we behave in Sioux Falls or in our state, well, in Sioux Falls for sure, and that we resist that, and we say we're going to be the ones who determine how our elected leaders are going to act and how our country is going to move forward. So what's worked within Braver Angels, that you can have this conversation with a person who's in opposition to you on a particular topic. What are the key parts of Braver Angels that make that possible? And is there actually an outcome that results in mutual understanding?
I'm not sure if there's an official way to grade the outcome of something like that. It's kind of a subjective thing, but I think, okay, Braver Angels has several methods that they work with in advance. One is the debates that we've talked about. The other is the red-blue conversations. Another thing that they're really encouraging people to do is now to pick not a resolution like a yes-no question, but a problem that needs to be solved. And then you bring people together of different political persuasions, and they work together at solving a problem. So it kind of gets your eyes off of yourself, and you have a practical problem that needs to be solved, and you're working in small groups on solving it. Another thing that we found is picking topics that are of local concern, because people come in at all kinds of different political persuasions, and so people will, like we had a real problem with our lake. We still have a real problem with our lake, but our lake is dying, and the cost of dredging it out is like $30 million. And now that we find out it has to be postponed again. So we have this massive issue. It's kind of a class divide, because you know it's the lake, and there's a lot of very nice houses on the lake, and some people are having to pay for this. And you know, why don't let the people that live along the lake pay for the lake, right? So it became a very contentious issue, and we had a debate on it, and brought in all kinds of experts, and it ended up being very, very valuable in that people realized that no matter which was the right way to do it, the expensive way, the dredging, or the other, there's a biological form of dredging that is much less expensive. And so no matter which one was correct, we kind of ended and settled on a conclusion, okay, this is a really big issue, and it's going to cost us some significant money. And when people came out of that debate, it wasn't like anybody won or lost, but we had a conversation. We had built the kind of context for a conversation. So the way I like to describe the difference between, if you're familiar with the terms of finite games and infinite games, there's some technical language around that. There's a real little philosophy book describing it. So a finite game is like a game where you get together and it's a debate, and you either win or lose, Oxford-style debate. And a Braver Angels debate is an infinite game. You win the game by having a quality conversation that builds the groundwork for further conversation. That's a win. And so I think with Braver Angels Courageous Conversations, that they do that. And especially now I'm looking forward to this new model where you actually get together and try to fix practical problems together as a group with various political persuasions represented. It'll be really interesting to see what comes of that and what kind of future that beholds.
Thank you for that example. James has a microphone, and I would love for you to think of a good question for one of our three panelists, or all of the panelists. So as James is coming over here, I wanted to ask you, Melissa, I mean, oh, James is right behind her. Melissa, how do we, is there a way to remain engaged in our civil society and our democracy without becoming cynical and burned out and just like to turn it off entirely? Is there a way that we can do that?
I was introduced to a new concept, so I've usually had a pretty deep reservoir for positivity. And I found that that was getting narrower. And so the resiliency window or the resiliency zone is a new concept to me. And what I began to realize is my resiliency zone had gotten really narrow. So when things happened, it would knock me outside of my zone. So there's the hyper, which you're combative, angry, whatever, and then the lower where you just almost become catatonic. So what I've been trying to do is widen my resiliency zone, which is done by face-to-face interaction. It's done by going off my phone. It's done by reading the news rather than getting clips of the news. Those are some of the ways that I build my resiliency zone. But I've been wondering about the resiliency zone of our nation. And I think our resiliency zone as a nation is very narrow. And anything that happens will just kick us out of that window where we're steady. And so I've just been wondering, what would it look like as a nation to widen our resiliency zone so these things don't knock us out of sorts so easily and so quickly. And so I'm thankful for something like this that creates connection and community with one another.
I think that reading instead of watching is really important, to where you can process it at your own speed, you can reread it, there's no implied tone with anything in the news you hear. I think that's really great advice. All right, go ahead, Doc.
Thank you. Wonderful conversation. My name is Dan. And one of the books that I've read in the last year, one of my favorite authors is Simon Sinek. He does a lot of leadership books, and his last book is called Leaders Eat Last. And he has a section in there on politics. And the example he uses was Congresswoman Stephanie Herseth Sandlin, when she was in Congress, about the time Newt Gingrich was telling everybody to go home for the weekend. But before that, they would go to the same little kids' basketball game, the same PTA meeting, go to dinner with each other. And the bottom line was they had a relationship and made a connection. And it's really hard to demonize somebody you know personally and actually like, and that's gone. They leave on Thursdays, they come back on Tuesday, and they don't have any of that. And I think we see that in the body politics in Washington, D.C. If you haven't read this book, it's really interesting. I ran into Congresswoman, the President Herseth, and she still has a relationship with the 180-degree different Maryland congressmen today that they nurtured during that time. So I would encourage you to read them, and I loved your comments on that.
Dr. Wilson, you go ahead and comment on that, but you also mentioned the decline of organizations like this contributing to the effect of polarization.
Yeah, many of you probably know the French aristocrat, or not aristocrat, but a French philosopher named Alexis de Tocqueville that came here in the early 19th century. And one of the things that he noticed when he was just kind of traveling around the country and thinking about why American democracy seems to be taking off is he called us a nation of joiners. And it spoke to what we call in the social sciences of civil society. And civil society is basically any organization that's bigger than a family but smaller than your political institutions. And it's civil society organizations of all different stripes, all different flavors, that really make up kind of the social and political fabric of a democracy. Because democracy is a team sport. It requires collective action if you're going to do anything. And it's these civic organizations that put people in the same space and get them talking, get them building relationships. And it helps them bridge some of these differences that can emerge. And it helps scale up. I'm not as concerned about the interactions between individuals in the same room. I'm more concerned about when we abstract, and it's an unseen group of people that we're adversaries with. And it's much easier to do all those things you said, demonize and blame and whip up fear. And that's one of the things that organizations like Rotary or any number of organizations like this, religious organizations, explicitly political organizations, those all make up this fabric, and those have weakened over the years. And with that, that contributes to this erosion, no doubt.
Any thoughts on that from either of the others?
I'd like to recommend a documentary about this. It's on Netflix. It's called Join or Die. It's about Robert Putnam, Bob Putnam. It's fantastic. If you ever want a shot in the arm of encouragement for being in Rotary, watch Join or Die. It's absolutely fantastic.
And much shorter than his book, Bowling Alone.
Much shorter than his book, exactly.
No, my wife actually shows that in her some of her classes. It's a great show.
Aaron.
Hi. My question for you is, over the past decade or so, we have seen major fractures between both parties. We've seen that with the Republican Party within their own party and also the Democrats within their own party, both on a national level and a state level. I would love to hear your insights on what can be done to repair those fractures.
In 1 minute or less. So how to repair the fractures between parties? You'd mentioned a little bit of it earlier.
You mean more within parties, right?
Oh, within parties,
Yeah.
thank you.
That's normal. Parties are not static. Parties are coalitions of various groups, and the coalitions that make up those parties change. So it is very normal for a party to kind of lose one little faction or two, and they're usually swallowed up by the other party. I'm not terribly concerned about making sure that Democrats stay together and Republicans stay together. In many ways, I would like it if those factions do move around a little bit, give some dynamism to the system, and better accommodate those factions. I mean, they're losing them for a reason, and it's probably healthier for them and probably healthier for our democracy in the end if they find a better home in the other party. And that's one of the reasons why, if you just look at the landscape of parties in the United States, the Democrats are entirely different than they were 50 or 100 years ago, and the same with the Republicans. That's just how it works. And since we only have two, you don't have a lot of choices of where to go.
Dwayne.
Dwayne Walk here. I think the government's been screwed up for a long time. And do you guys up there remember Vietnam War? The politicians were pretty screwed up back then, and they still are. So, nobody agreed on anything back then. And that's why that war went on, and why we had no intention of winning the war. So I happened to be there, and it wasn't fun.
Thanks for that comment, Dwayne. Other questions? Right down here, Pam.
Pam Cole with Bread Break. Thank you so much for this conversation. I would be interested to hear what your thoughts are on no party affiliation and what that means or can mean. And then also, what can the average person, citizen, what are some examples of how we can walk what you're suggesting?
Yeah, I think Melissa, go ahead.
So in my coaching practice, I have 5 questions that I ask people about clarifying for courage. And the second question is, what are your fears or concerns about what's happening? Because when we're not clear about our fears or concerns, we operate out of them. And then the third question is, what would make this successful? And so I think as just an average American, I keep asking, what would make this successful? What would I want to see? Because when I only am working out of my fears or concerns, that's what I'm seeing. But when I start asking what success looks like, I'm able to recognize it in others. So an example would be our society is successful? How would we know that America is successful? And then we can start looking for those things instead of just operating out of our fears or concerns.
Any other thoughts? Joel, go ahead.
I would like to just suggest that you consider becoming a member of Brave Angels. Brave Angels is really take you 5 minutes to join. And one of the things that does provide you is access to thousands of debates and conversations that are being held online at all times. You can jump in and be a part of different conversations. We had a student that moderated one of these a while back, and there were 700 people that were in this discussion group. And so, so there's some real opportunities there also. Now this is how crazy I'm in, the ridiculous level at which I'm involved in Brave Angels. So I'm a member of Brave Angels. The McGovern Center is a part of the Brave Angels Network. I'm a Braver Scholar, and I'm the director of the Brave Angels Network in South Dakota. So that's a few ways to be connected with Braver Angels. But I do want to encourage you to consider becoming a member, and I'd love for the Rotary to do an event, do one of the courageous conversations. I'd be really happy to help out.
Thank you for that invitation. Do you want to wrap us up?
Yeah, I'd say one thing about the no labels part. Would you buy milk without a label? We learn a lot from labels. If you look at a ballot and you just see names, you wouldn't know much about what's behind those names. You get a lot of information from that party affiliation. And if you look at places in this country where we don't have partisan affiliation, those are the lowest participation elections we have. And that's not an accident. And one of the things that I'll curse the progressives for the rest of my life is nonpartisan local elections. They absolutely devastated local politics by doing that.
Nonpartisan local elections.
And where government matters the most is at your local level. And in a good city election, you might have 10-15% people show up because the parties used to bring them out, and now they're not even allowed to participate.
Thank you. Well, one of the areas of focus of Rotary, as you've heard me say, is peace building and conflict prevention. Prevention is not about silence or neutrality. It's about the courage to speak truth respectfully and to listen even when it's uncomfortable and to lead when anger is easier than grace. Conflict prevention is proactive. We're not sitting around waiting for somebody else to do it. It means identifying the fractures that keep people apart, like misinformation and mistrust, and choosing to mend those fractures early and connect with people through conversation. So today's discussion isn't about calming down. Nobody ever calmed down when you told them to calm down. It's a call to action. It's about strengthening our emotional intelligence, our moral imagination, and our civic courage so that when tensions rise, and they will, we can lead with steadiness and not from a position of fear. So I'd like you to thank our panelists today for this conversation. And we will have another conversation, or the first one maybe ever in Sioux Falls won't probably happen here. So we'll take you up on that. Thank you. Just another announcement here before we talk about next week, and then we get you out of here. The venue, which we've been talking about, and I didn't intend for the first 3 months of my presidency of Downtown Rotary to be consumed with this, so hopefully you didn't feel consumed by our conversation about the potential of moving to the Sharapa Interconnect versus staying here at the Alliance. So again, I just want to thank Jeff Schurslick for the offer to have our club move downtown. Jeff has been a member of this club for a long, long time, and his heart was in that offer. And thanks to the Alliance for being a good host of ours for the past year and for just making modifications to the things that make this place our home. And so our board voted, and we voted 10-3 to stay at the Alliance. And so, at least for the foreseeable future. All right. And then, like any kind of issue, that there's two sides to it. There will be people who are just as upset by that as those who were delighted by clapping. But again, it was just something we felt was right for the club. And so we'll establish a new agreement in January with the Alliance. and we'll continue to look at what other opportunities pop up downtown to host downtown Rotary. So thanks for your patience through that process. I'll send out a video and some information either later today or tomorrow to those of our members who are not here today. If you have questions, I'll be around afterwards, and you can talk to any of the board members. So next week's program on the 20th will be Jack Marsh, a Hall of Famer himself, introducing us to the 2025 South Dakota Hall of Fame inductees. So with that, have a great Native American Day, and Rotary's adjourned.
Well, that was maybe.